Thank you. We are in John's Gospel, chapter 9 is our text. If you don't have your Bibles, take a pew Bible and turn to page 1064, and Jesus heals a man born blind. We've been looking at the miracles of Jesus in John's Gospel. He has 7 of them. Now, there were many more. We know the very last verse of John's Gospel says if all of the things that Jesus had done were written down, there wouldn't be enough books to hold them. It's just amazing. So John just picked 7 because for John, the number has meaning. It's not just chronology between 6 and 8, but 7 has a meaning. It is the meaning of God. God's number is 7. That's why ORU, 77, South Lewis, okay? It's not 74 something else. It's Oral picked it because of that. It is God's number. 12, fullness, 12 tribes of Israel. 12 times 12, 144, throw some zeros on, and that's the fullness. That's what 12 means. 3, it's God's number. 6 is man's number. 666 is a bad number. I had somebody give me that charge the other day. I said, ooh, I don't like that number. Can we change it? They added 50 cents to it. So 666.50. So I wish I was joking, but anyway. So this number is significant. And so 7 times Jesus is going to do miracles that John records. And that's what we've been looking at. This one is different than any of the others. Man born blind, in that culture, in that day, nobody, and in fact in all of the Old Testament, nobody is ever healed of blindness. And it is the most familiar miracle of Jesus was to heal people born blind. It's an amazing story. And the blind man references this, that nobody has ever been healed that was born blind. So we look at the cast of characters. You see this listed in your bulletin that we talk about that. First of all is Jesus, and then we see the blind man, we see the disciples, we see that they send the blind man to his neighbors who get into a discussion about this whole incident, and then the Pharisees are brought into it because of Sabbath, and then the parents are also part of the narrative. And so I think of all the stories in the gospel, and maybe of all the stories in the Bible, this one may be my very favorite. It's a comedy routine. Who's on first? I mean, it is just this whole thing and the response of the blind man back to the Pharisees. It's an amazing story. And certainly we get the most beloved hymn of the faith which we've had today. Amazing grace. I once was lost, but now I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. And so this is a personal connection too for me as we're about to read in John chapter 9, verses 1 through 7. We've placed this on our table today, and if you were to look at the caption, it says, I once was blind, but now I see. And my friend Everett Piper, who is just retiring from Oklahoma Wesleyan University. I've been on his board of trustees for about 15 years. I took Everett and Marcy and their 2 sons to Israel with me, and they have a life-size statue of the man born blind at the Bartlesville campus. And he had this made for me as a gift of appreciation. This is in my home, and so when, by the way, did you know I'm a grandfather? Randy and Kim, you knew I was a grandfather, right? So this is we had one this week. Evie J was born on April, and it was perfect. This was what I was rooting for. April Fool's Day. I'm Halloween. We have a spook and a fool, okay? And Jeffrey's born on the 4th of July, so all the big holidays are covered. But when I hold Logan in my arms, Logan is the 1-year-old. She loves this. And she'll come over and she'll touch his face, and I'll say, touch his hand. She'll reach over and touch his hand. She just gravitates towards the statue. So I have a little personal connection with this. So this is the blind man, and this is going to be our story. There's lots of things that are going on. I thought about reading the whole chapter with you because it is just so funny. It's just such a great story. But in response to the reverence we have in our heart for God's word, let's stand as we do our reading. John chapter 9, verses 1 through 7. Ready? As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said to him, Go wash in the Pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. May God add his blessing to the reading of his holy word. Thank you. You may be seated. And if there's a hand next to you, take it as we pray. May the words of my mouth, the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Well, Jesus takes the initiative, and he never does. You never know what he's going to do. And so this was different. So he's walking by in Jerusalem one day, and here's this blind man. And so it immediately goes into this conversation with the disciples about the cause, the origin of the man's blindness. Because we've always got to figure out why. Why did this happen? And that's the first question that you've got to answer, but sometimes there are really no answers to it. So was it the blind man's, did his parents sin, or was it because he sinned while he was in utero? And there was a saying that if you were born with a disability, it's because while you were in the womb, you sinned. And that's what they said, that's why the baby kicks, was because the baby is sinning. That's the ancients thought that. No kidding. And so they had this big discussion and all of that. And so was it A or B? Was it his fault or was it the fault of the parents? And Jesus doesn't answer A or B. Instead, there's C. There's a different answer. So he's going to look at it that this is done so that for this man, for this situation, that God's glory might be revealed. I don't know if you've ever been around blind people. But so the really amazing stories. One of the most beloved hymns of the church, and she was a prolific hymn writer. Her name was Fanny Crosby, and she was blind just a few days after her birth, as Stevie Wonder was blind just a few days after his birth. Ray Charles, another blind individual, phenomenal. I don't know how they do that. I've just marveled at how they can play and sing and do that without sight. I just don't know how they can do that. Somebody I want to invite to come and speak to us is one of the most interesting, marvelous human beings. And unlike Bob Goff that we had to bring in from California, Jim Stovall is right here in Tulsa. And I want him to come and speak to us in some place. I greatly admire this man. I mean, he is an incredible person. I'd love to figure out some format to have Jim come and share with us. So there's one more, only I don't really admire him, but he was the umpire in the 1985 St. Louis Cardinals Kansas City Royals game, and he blew the call. His name is Don Denkinger. So blind men sometimes referee and umpire sporting events. I've never shared this with you, but, and you'd think you know everything about me. I've been here 26 years, but when I was probably 14, I noticed, and my sister, that there was something wrong with our father. And we could see it because on the kitchen table where the coffee pot was, my dad was feeling around to find the coffee pot. He was going blind. And And I always loved coming to Asbury and seeing my friend John Westervelt, because John Westervelt office next door to my dad at the Amico Research Center at 41st and Yale, and they were it's always a great connection to hear those stories, even recently. But we watched as my dad struggled with this. It's because of diabetes, and he died when he was 56 of complications from diabetes. But he lost his eyesight. How the man worked until he died, I have no idea. He was not completely blind, but he could not drive. And we discovered that when we went, my parents believed, like Johnny, as he was talking about, one of the best things parents can do for the kids is to take them on trips. We didn't throw objects out the car windows like Johnny did, but anyway, that's a different story. But we were in San Francisco. We were literally driving on the Golden Gate Bridge. My family of origin says men do the driving. So my dad is driving, but we had noticed how erratic his driving was. And when we crossed the Golden Gate Bridge, we literally scraped the Golden Gate Bridge. We thought we might flip over into San Francisco Bay or something. We pulled over after that, and as a result of that, I was 15 and a half. I drove us back to Tulsa. I remember, it was white knuckle time for me and everybody in the family, but it was better for me to do the driving than my dad. I've thought about that as a strong man, trying to be in that position of having to give up the driver's seat and to sit in the passenger seat or even in the back seat. And so it was a difficult thing. I've watched that, I've seen that, and those that have lost their sight, how difficult that is. And you have to rely on other things. So this man is born blind. And as a result of his blindness, then, he is reduced to being a beggar. They didn't have a way for him to compensate, and so he spent his life. Don't know how old the man is. He's got parents, so in that day, parents really didn't live that long. So I don't know. Maybe he's in his 20s. I don't know. We don't know. But there comes a time that the disciples ask this why question. Jesus doesn't answer A or B. He gives them a C answer, that the works of God are going to be revealed. And he talks about how important it is that we do the work of God. And that while it is daylight, that it's important to do the work of God. And this is one of my axioms, is that people who love God have great energy for the things of God. Let me say that again. People who love God have great energy for the things of God. And so when we show a video like children's ministry, people who love God are going to say, that would be so like Jesus to serve children. Sign me up. How can I get in the game? How can I respond? And so this is what Jesus is going to do. He's going to work at it. And some of the works of Jesus are going to be really, really fun. He's going to get to turn water into wine. He's going to heal certain people, and there's going to be a lot of hoorah, the feeding of the multitude. That was a wonderful moment, the walking on the water and the surprise, aha, it's Jesus. He had a lot of fun moments. But he also talked about that there's going to come a time of darkness because the light is going to end. He's referring to his crucifixion. And the fun is going to be replaced by hard times. And as we go through life, there are a lot of fun things, but life is not always fun. There are hard times and hard decisions and hard places that we find ourselves in. Sometimes it's because of our health. And in talking with a number of you, as I call you and visit with you, and as we see you in the hospital, and as we hold your hand at the time of loss, we recognize the limitations that we all have. And so one of the difficult things is that we've got to work at this. And as long as we have life and health, and as long as we can show up, and as long as we can do something, we want to engage. And so Jesus is with these disciples. They're asking the question. Here's the blind man, and Jesus walks over to the blind man, and he does something. If you think about it, you put yourself in the sandals of the blind man. You hear Jesus, and these disciples have been talking about you like you can hear, you can't see, but you can hear what they're saying, and they're like talking about you. It's like, God, talk about somebody behind their back? No, he's right there. And they're just like, hey, Jesus, look at this blind man. What do you think about him? Was it his fault or his parents' fault? It's like, gee whiz, guys, tone it down. And so you're blind. And the next thing you know is you hear this guy go, and the next thing you know is that he spit and he's put mud in your eyes. You haven't said, hey, come heal me. I mean, you hear this discussion, the next thing you know, spit's not a nice thing to do. It's not a nice thing to do. In fact, there are laws about spitting in 5 United States states. They're laws. You're not supposed to spit in 5 of them. Job was spit on. Jesus was spit on. If you want to show disrespect to somebody, that's probably about the best way you can do it. You can spit on them. So this guy spits, puts the mud in the guy's eyes, and says, go to the Pool of Siloam. You think like, well, what in the world is going on here? So he had a choice to make. This guy was passive up till now. Now he has to respond, and there are times that we've got to respond too. And so off he goes to the Pool of Siloam, which is interesting because 5 years ago, if you go to Jerusalem, they did not know. They thought the Pool of Siloam was in a different place in Jerusalem. There was a leaky faucet, literally, that showed where the real, that's the trace, they found where the real Pool of Siloam is. And so if you go to Jerusalem, you'll probably go through the Hezekiah tunnel, and then you will pop out and you're at the Pool of Siloam, which means, as a pun, it means sent. So the man goes down there, he exercises his faith, he walks down there, and he washes off. And the first thing that he sees, most likely, is water. What an interesting story. And so as this story unfolds, then the neighbors get into this argument. Well, this is the guy, that he was the beggar. Other neighbors say, no, he's not. He keeps saying, yes, I'm the man. No, you're not. Yes, I am. What do you mean I'm not the man? Yes, I am. And it's just really funny to read through chapter 9. I can't read it without smiling. And then, I don't know which the bright idea, who had the bright idea, which neighbor said, let's take him to the Pharisees, because you see, the problem was, what's the problem in the story with the Pharisees? Sabbath. You can't heal on the Sabbath. And Jesus healed a man on the Sabbath. I think he did it just to like poke them in the eye. And so the response then is that like, well, okay, you can't heal and then they tell Jesus that he was born in sin. They get into this heated argument. They ask the man, how was it? I don't know how it happened. Well, who is this man that healed you? Well, I really don't know. I've never really met the man. He just spit into my eye. That's all I know. Well, let's get your parents. So they can bring the parents in. They interrogate the parents. The parents are terrified. They think the Pharisees are a pretty powerful group, that they're going to do something bad to them. And so that's what happens. And this whole story just continues to unfold and go every which way. And then the blind man wants to thank Jesus, but doesn't know where he is. And Jesus, for the second time, shows initiative, and he finds the blind man. And he tells the blind man that who he is, and I am the light of the world. Now, as we have spoken about, John has 7 miracles. He also has 7 what we call I am statements. I am is what Moses asked God what his name was, and he said, do you remember? I am, I am. So when Jesus is 7 times in John's gospel, only found in John's gospel, says in chapter 6, I am the bread of life. In chapter 8, I am the light of the world. Chapter 9 also, I am the light of the world. Chapter 10, I am the gate. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. He says also in chapter 11, we'll look at that next week, that I am the resurrection, I am the life. In chapter 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Chapter 15, I am the true vine. So Jesus keeps saying, I am, I am. And he's using these images to show that light has come into the world. Now, sometimes light comes into the world, and I don't know if you've ever turned over a board or something, and it's been out in the field, and you turn the board over, and then the bugs run away. That's kind of what's happened here, is that in chapter 8, the previous text, is that they brought a woman caught in the act of adultery to Jesus, and they were ready to stone her. And Jesus comes up with, "He who is without sin, cast the first stone." And so it was almost like watching light expose darkness, and the rocks dropped, and they left. And 8:12, this is when Jesus said, "I am the light of the world." And it's like that there is light comes into our world to eradicate darkness. But light can also have a different effect, that light can come into the world to grow things and to develop things. So if you leave that board out for any length of time, that most likely something is going to start growing on it. And light is what gives us life. And so this is the connection that Jesus is making, and that there is life in my name. And so the blind man comes and says, "Well, tell me who you are, and I am the light of the world." And you can receive this light into your life. A number of years ago, there was a wonderful book that was written called The Miracle Worker. And it was made into a Broadway play and also into a movie. And it's about the life of Helen Keller. Helen Keller was a little girl that was born just absolutely fine. In addition to Dada and Mama, the little girl was talking, and she could say wah wah and other things, wah wah for water. She could say a lot of different words and everything. She was a very bright little girl. But when she was 19 months old, she was hit by some kind of disease. They think it was probably scarlet fever. And with that, she was blinded, she became deaf and mute. And though she lived, the family kind of thought it would have been better probably if she had died. How do you deal in the 1880s with a little girl who is blind, deaf, and mute? And as a result, as she was growing up, she became like an animal. She would have temper tantrums, she would break dishes, she would throw food. She was totally out of control. And so her parents didn't know what to do with her, but there was a lady that showed up, a strong Christian by the name of Anne Sullivan. And they hired her to take care of Helen, but Anne thought that Helen Keller had an immortal soul of great value, and that there was something that she could learn, and that God had a purpose for her life, and that she was teachable. Her parents disagreed, but Anne tried to work, and it was impossible to get anything done when they were around the Kellers, because they were on the one hand, they loved their daughter. On the other hand, they were so angry with what was going on, they didn't know what to do. But Anne realized as long as the Kellers were present in Helen's life, nothing good was ever going to be accomplished. So Anne asked the Kellers, "Can I take your daughter, and we're going to go to a cottage and just the two of us live?" And they signed off on that. And slowly and surely, she began to change her character. And she taught her how to sit at the table, how not to throw the food and break the dishes, how to use a knife and fork, how to fold a napkin. And all the time she was doing this, she was trying to imprint in her hand these concepts. Dada, mama, wah wah, mud. And then she would rub her hands through the mud, and she would take her to the tree, Tree, and imprint those on Helen's hand, and Helen wasn't getting it at all. It was a game. Then, after the progress was being made, the Kellers showed up. And sometimes we operate out of empathy, and sometimes out of responsibility, and sometimes empathy is not a good thing. You got to deal in a responsible way. And so the empathy factor kicks in, and they say to Anne, "You're being too cruel to our daughter. You shouldn't discipline her. You should let her run wild and be the little animal that she was with us." And so they brought her back home. Anne went back home. It was a total disaster. The little girl reverted back to the animal behavior. It was chaos. And finally, in that scene, the miracle worker, Helen burst out the door, went out to the pump, and demanded that Anne pump water for her. Anne complied. She pumped the water. But rather than giving it to Helen as she wanted for a drink, she doused the little girl with the water. She was so frustrated with everything going on. She doused that little girl with the water and all the time wrote W-A-T-E-R on her hand. And then it clicked. It wasn't a game. W-A-T-E-R was what I want to drink. And that's that cool substance running over my head. And then it clicked. M-U-D, mud. That's what this is. It's mud. I can feel it. I can't see it. I can't speak to it. I can't hear it, but I can feel it. T-R-E-E, tree. Oh, the bark. Oh, that's a tree. And then as the miracle worker shows, the little girl ran back into the house, climbed up in her daddy's lap. D-A-D-D-Y-L-O-V-E. By the end of the day, she had learned 30 words, and she was off to becoming this incredible person. Psychiatrists agree the reason that she was able to make the connection was when she was a little girl, she understood those concepts. They were imprinted in her soul. And later, she understood, hear me now, the sign led to a deeper reality. As the miracles of Jesus led to a deeper reality, so Helen Keller was able to understand that all of these things were to point to a new identity. And that's what Jesus does for us as well. Imprinted on every human soul, every human being is of ultimate value, whether disabled in some capacity or another. We're all disabled because sin has entered the world and it's spread to everybody. We're all disabled in one way or another. We all have limitations. But what happens is that divine image stamped upon our hearts is touched by the love of God. And that's what this story is about. And maybe the reason I love this story so much is because I think of that guy. His whole life has changed in a moment. And he comes and he looks in the eyes of Jesus. And Jesus says, I'm the light of the world. You can see that now. You get it. And I want to give you life. We don't find life in any other source. We find it through the amazing grace of Jesus Christ, who's imprinted deep within our souls and is yearning to burst forth that we might have life and growth and grace. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, has saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. We sang the language of my conversion moment, Just As I Am, a few moments ago. I didn't select that hymn, but I thought, oh my goodness, the song that Pastor Emeritus Bill Mason is best known for is this one. Johnny?
Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim